Hello, dear listener, it's Jeffers here of Sitcom Showdown. I think this is episode 101, and hello, Steve.
Hello. Hello, listeners.
Yes.
Lovely to be back with you.
It is. It's been a little while. Not our fault, I should hasten to add, but we're back and we're going to be looking at Beans of Boston, which doesn't immediately conjure up a well-known sitcom, but if people were to listen to our previous episode where we talked about Are You Being Served? And so when this came up in that as being a US version of Are You Being Served, it was too irresistible to resist.
Essentially, yeah.
Yes. What are your immediate thoughts on the prospect when I first said let's watch this one?
We're not in this for the clicks or the views or the downloads, are we? Because
No.
I'm not sure the world was clamouring for a podcast about Beans of Boston, but it's interesting to me and it's interesting to you, so
yeah. Well, in that case,
we'll have some fun.
Yeah, we'll share some of our newfound knowledge with the listener. So, Beans of Boston, which is a pilot that never got picked up. This was broadcast on the 5th of May 1979. So you and I, Steve, were originally slated to record this on the 5th of May, exactly 44 years after, which I'm not sure you were aware of when you booked the day. Yeah, so that would have been really cool.
Yeah,
but
it would be.
Here we are a fortnight later. Anyway, so the basic back of the fag packet thing about this sitcom is to keep from being fired by his uncle, young Franklin Beane has a bright idea for a theme week at the men's and ladies' wear department of Beans of Boston department store. So instead of having, the big change here is, young Mr. Grace, who is old Mr. Beane in this one, his nephew is taking the role that Mr. Rumbold would have had.
Yes.
So young Franklin Beane he's in charge of that department, instead of Juggy is Mr. Rumbold. Yeah, that's all you need to know.
Do you think this arrangement was put in place with a view to him taking over the reins long term?
Could be, yes.
Who knows?
It's a difficult one, though, because that might not have been wise, because as you'll hear from me later on, old Mr. Beane is played by a very good, very reputable comedy actor, and young Mr. Beane's a bit of a wooden, not very experienced actor.
But he's a good-looking chappie.
He's a good-looking chappie. Yep, he's up there with Face from the A-Team and what's his name from Battlestar Galactica and all those sorts of people. He's in Jefferson sort of mode, isn't he? Anyway, let's get on to more info. This is like, talk about a powerful production unit and cast by cracky. This was produced by Gary Marshall, who also did Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy. Was Happy Days and all its spin-offs, basically. It was directed by Jerry Paris, who also directed The Munsters, The Dick Van Dyke Show, and The Odd Couple, plus 237 episodes of Happy Days, and the movies Police Academy 2 and Police Academy 3.
Okay.
He's obviously a comedy legend. So that's a pretty, gags aside, that's a hefty producing and directing duo.
Yeah. Well, seems it's shaping up to be another one of those ones where the pedigree was right, but maybe it just didn't fire on all cylinders for reasons which I guess we'll...
Yes, the whole was way crappier than the sum of the parts.
We'll throw some conjecture about that later on.
Quite right. Now, as we know, Are You Being Served used to be written by Croft and Lloyd. The American writers on this show, writer Sheldon Bull, which is a pretty cool name, I think. But yeah, there's, he would have collaborated with the Are You Being Served originators, David Croft and Jeremy Lloyd. Yep. Who, as we know, are also the Hello people and very well loved. Anyway, that brings us on to the cast, Steve, which I was very impressed with the cast. Yeah,
you're knocked out by the quality, apart from Franklin.
Yeah, apart from Franklin. Oh, definitely. Well, let's start with the person I recognise first. There's two of them, but we'll start with the dude. This is John Hillerman as John Peacock.
Yep.
Did you immediately know him when you saw him?
I did, and then, of course, I was thinking, well, which show did I recognise him from? And I think it's Magnum PI.
Yeah.
You had the same thoughts?
Yeah, totally. I thought, that's that bloke. I'd forgotten his name, obviously. Higgins, isn't it, the character?
Yeah. To be fair, there's probably a couple of other things I've seen him in, so it could have been other things, but most likely Magnum PI. which was huge in Australia
Yeah.
for a while.
Yes, because Higgins in Magnum PI does have a hint of the Captain Peacock about him. So he did 158 episodes of Magnum in 9 years. But he was Howard Johnson in Blazing Saddles, Steve.
Yeah. So he did.
Yes.
Well, it's not just that Mel Brooks film either, is it? He did. What are some of those other kind of spoof?
Oh, you know, like
movies?
your Airplane, which over here
yeah.
is Flying High, and all that sort of
He was in
Police
some real
Squad, that sort of
classic comedy movies.
Totally.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to be drawing parallels with obviously Captain Peacock, Frank Thornton, and John Hillerman here as Mr Peacock. But
yeah, so this is going to be confusing because we kept calling Captain Peacock Mr Peacock in the last episode. So are we going to start calling him Captain Peacock instead of Mr Peacock?
Or Corporal Peacock or something like that. I don't know. Yes, this chappie, John Hillerman, had 4 years in the Air Force in the 1950s. And Frank Thornton, who played Captain Peacock, was also in the Air Force.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yes. So they're both Air Force chappies. I thought that was...
It gives them that...
bearing.
The bearing,
Yes. The authorita. Mm-hmm. All right, anyway, moving on to the other superstar of this show, in Jeffrey's opinion, Charlotte Rae as May Slocombe.
Okay. Yep, very good.
Oh, I've described this as another solid bit of casting. I'm glad you agree, Steve.
Well, you tell me why you think.
Yeah. Well, I knew her
case.
instantly as the lady from Diff'rent Strokes.
Right, okay.
But the spin-off of Diff'rent Strokes, which was The Facts of Life, that got even more episodes. So, by cracky, she did 150-odd episodes of Facts of Life. So, yeah, she's obviously done a hell of a lot of sitcom action. But I think while she was doing this, I think it was the week after this went out, that she ended up doing The Facts of Life.
Yeah, it was around the same time.
Yeah. So she would have been very busy if this had taken off. Right, now, as you know, Steve, I like to look at the age of actors, right? And because then I go, oh, they were so old when I was young, but it's terrifying when they're younger than me and blah, blah, blah. But I just wanted to compare the two. So Charlotte Rae was 53 years old when she did this. And Molly Sugden was like a couple of weeks off turning 53 when she did the equivalent German Week episode of Are You Being Served?
Huh.
So again, the casting's like bang on.
Yep.
I think visually she works really well as a Mrs. Slocombe, and she's certainly the right age, and she's got all the comedy chops.
The reason she caught my interest was she was in quite a few episodes of Car 54, Where Are You?
What?
I don't know if you've ever heard of that one
You've
before.
told me a bit about this, but I've forgotten.
I have, I heard about it from the Gilbert Gottfried podcast, and he used to mention this quite often, and I think he had some people on his show who were involved in making that. But she played one of the wives of one of the officers in the police force there, and her husband in the show was played by Al Lewis, who was Grandpa from the Munsters.
Yeah.
And one of the main characters in Car 54 was Fred Gwynne, who played Herman Munster. So
Right. Is this pre or post Munsters? Sorry.
Oh, well, this was from 64 to 66, so
Okay.
I'm guessing it must be just before the Munsters, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. Well, there you go. Small world.
Hmm.
Anything else to add before I roll
No,
on?
that was just why that was the thing that jumped out at me when I was looking through her list of
And
accomplishments.
Steve went, ooh, Car
Yeah.
54.
Yeah.
Well, you've taught me something, so that's good. Now, this is the tricky one, isn't it, Steve? When we talk about Mr. Humphreys, how can it's such a unique individual, and I'm sure both of us will talk about this at great length later on, but the actor playing George Humphreys is Alan Suez, or Alan Suez. How would you pronounce it?
Well, I just said it to myself the way it looks, which is Suze.
Suez. Excellent.
As if he's going to take
S-U-E. He's
you to court.
Yeah, that's right. Alan Suez. Oh, does he? I didn't know that, but thanks for the tip. He was famous for 96 episodes of Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In between 1968 and 1972, which was a bit of a sketch show.
It was a bit sketchy.
Yeah, it was a bit sketchy. Well done.
Because I looked this up as well, because I was wondering, his interpretation of Mr. Humphreys comes across as being fairly well formed. So then I was wondering, well, how is that the case? And he played some effeminate characters in the sketches that they did on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. So obviously he brought that to this role.
He's a camp specialist.
If you like.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, he probably had more bows in his quiver than that. Bows? Arrows. Yeah, he had an exceptionally large quiver. It was full of bows. Hawkeye would be proud. Let's move on before I start talking more rubbish. George O'Hanlon Jr., who I described earlier as inexperienced and a little bit wooden, he plays Franklin Beane. Smashing name, though, George O'Hanlon Jr. Oh, he's in the position of Mr. Rumbold, as I said. Yes, he was 26 years old when he got this role. 10 years later, though, Steve, he was a regular on Jake and the Fat Man. Do you remember Jake and the Fat Man?
Is that a police show?
Yeah, action, policey, detective-y, sort of...
Mustachioed
Yeah, well, with a fat bloke and Jake. Yeah, he did 13 episodes of Jake and the Fat Man. But he'd also been in 3 episodes of Magnum PI, according to my notes. And he did other bit parts here and there. But there's a Magnum connection with, there's quite... I don't know how, but there is.
The Magnum connection?
Magnum! What, like the rainbow connection?
Yeah, except with a Magnum.
It's chocolate covered. Yes.
No one's going to know.
Yeah.
A Magnum is a delicious
of course they
chocolatey ice cream in
I
Australia.
think, it's British, I believe, Steve-O.
What?
Magnums are
stole
highly
the idea
popular
from us,
items in Britain. Oh, yeah. Trust me. Yeah.
Okay.
Please write in if you're a British listener to confirm you have Magnums and are they highly rated? Because people here love Magnums. But it's a bit hotter. It's ice cream place, Australia, whereas in Britain, when you're freezing all the time, why on earth would you want an ice cream? But I suppose,
it's a good point.
Those 2 days a year on Brighton Beach or Blackpool or something, you might want an ice cream. I'm digging myself in further. I'm going to move on. Mr. Lucas, Steve.
Yes.
Is played by Larry Bishop. Do you want to take the lead or shall I just...
No, I've run out of notes now.
Whee!
On the cast.
Oh, dude. He's the son of Rat Pack comedian Joey Bishop.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So he would have grown up like...
He was probably
drenched in
bounced
comedy.
on Frank Sinatra's lap. And
Absolutely. And
on his
Sammy
knee or
Davis
whatever, not on
Jr.
his
would
lap.
be, teaching him all the tricks of the trade. So he more recently had a role in Kill Bill Volume 2.
Huh.
And he kind of specialised in the late 1960s in biker movies, like The Savage Seven and a famous biker movie called Blondie. Now, it's worth remembering, Steve-O, that as mentioned, this show's director was Jerry Paris. And Jerry Paris had directed almost all, if not all, the episodes of The Joey Bishop Show for Larry Bishop's dad. So the director clearly knew, we're on a winner here. Well, I know just the person for the role. Young Larry Bishop. There you go. Let's move on to Miss Brahms, Shirley Brahms, who retained the same first name, I believe. This
Indeed.
is...
I think so.
I think it's a bit odd, though, that everyone else's name has been changed and hers is retained. Odd, isn't it? I could be dead wrong, though.
Maybe Shirley is a name that is just as popular or whatever in the US as it is in the UK.
Ah, yes.
Would that be a reason you changed the names?
Could be. But either way, Lorna Patterson. Now, it looks like this was only her second role. So along with the other bloke, George O'Hanlon, she's quite young and inexperienced. But it could have been a very big break if this had gone. This would have been her big break because, as we know, in sitcoms, when you're starting off, you always like to have a new character that everything can be explained to. And in the traditional Are You Being Served, of course, that was Mr. Lucas. But in this one, it's Miss Brahms. And so spotlight's on her.
I was going to say her character's much more in the forefront of things in this pilot episode than it is in the UK. So
yeah. So if it had gone ahead, she could have been a star. But it didn't
she
really
could have
matter.
been a contender.
Could have been a contender. Anyway, Steve, yeah. So she had to only wait 2 years, though. She did get a big break because she starred in the sitcom version of Private Benjamin, which was that Goldie Hawn movie. She did 39 episodes of Private Benjamin. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, who knew? I didn't. I wonder if her acting improved a little bit as she, she wouldn't have got cast for such a major role in that if she, anyway. Yeah, so as you can tell, I'm going to criticise some of her performance.
Bit of foreshadowing there.
Yeah. Oh, man, with these...
So what you're telling me is there's entire scenes that are portrayed by two people that can't act.
Yeah. I think you know which ones we mean. Yes, exactly.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. I was just going to launch into a minor whinge about whenever we do one of these massive cast sitcoms, it takes us forever to get through the cast list, but we're down to the final two, Steve. Tom Poston, or Poston, as Frank Beane. He's meant to be the equivalent, of course, of young Mr. Grace, the old codger, if you know what I mean. Tom, the actor, he was only 57 when he played this role, whereas young Mr. Grace, played by Harold Bennett, he was 77 when the show started.
Right, so we're talking about Mr. Beane.
The senior.
Senior, the uncle.
The uncle.
Right, okay. I'm with you now.
Yeah. So he's trying to play someone in his 70s or 80s, but he's only 57.
Yep.
So, yes, as I said, young Mr. Grace, Harold Bennett, was 77 when the show started. He was born in the 1890s, Steve.
What?
Yes. So, back to Tom Poston, or Poston, he did a show called Hawkins Falls, population 6,200. Now, this show was in the 1950s. It was a live show, Steve.
Oh, wow.
And he did, hold on to your hat, because this blew my mind. I've never heard anything like it. He did 1,044 episodes of Hawkins Falls.
Well, how's that possible? Were they doing it every night?
It must be like 5 days a week.
It was like a syndicated radio show. They just pumped them out.
Yeah, I think it might have even been a TV show. Anyway, you know him, Steve-O, as George from Newhart.
Okay.
You know Newhart a little bit. I know you do.
I've dabbled a little bit.
You've dabbled? He did 184 episodes of Newhart. So he's aging up to play this role in this show. Now, lastly, Morgan Farley is an actor who plays Mr. Granger.
Mm-hmm.
He was born in 1898, the same year as Harold Bennett, who played young Mr. Grace.
Wow.
So this dude playing Mr. Granger is the age that Tom Poston should be to play the role.
Right,
but, he's done a Clive Dunn. But this guy, man, Morgan Farley, far out. There's these movie posters from the 1920s, and he was like the star of all these 1920s films. He was a major headlining star in the 1920s.
It's amazing because he's quite a small bloke.
Yeah.
So
well, age has withered him.
Well, I guess so. We all shrink with age.
Yes, and people were smaller back then.
But still, you think of a leading man as being, like a...
Errol Flynn was only
burly.
4'2", What? No, I'm just making up lies. But yes, that's right. But it's amazing. He was a proper movie star in the 1920s. He was 81 in 1979 when this went out. But yeah, no, he isn't the largest chappie in the world.
No, especially compared to some of his castmates. Because the Franklin Bean bloke, he's over 6 foot, surely.
Yeah, I'd say so, definitely. Yeah.
You haven't got his measurements there?
No.
No.
I know how old people are, I just don't know how tall they are. Anyway, having got through the cast, Steve, we'll bypass the question where we normally ask, when was the first time you saw this?
Yeah, okay.
Because it was obviously
3 days ago.
Yeah. And we'll take in a lovely clip, and traditionally, as we do, we'll take in the theme tune, and we'll be back.
Here's my store, Beans of Boston, built in 1888. Clothes for men of means in Boston, latest fashions up to date. That was early days in Boston, now the competition's tough. Could be curtains, Beans of Boston, if my store don't sell enough. My goodness, who are you?
I'm Ingrid, your new secretary, Mr. Beane.
Where's the last one?
Well, she quit. She complained you made the naughty remarks, 60 propositions, and had the wandering hands.
Good heavens, Uncle, is that true?
Not all in the same day.
And you behave yourself, or I won't stay either.
If I behave myself, what's the difference? Oh, Franklin, are you still here?
Yes, Uncle, and I was saving it for a surprise, but I want to tell you, I've got a marvelous idea on how to increase our sales.
You're going to quit?
No, Uncle. No, this time it's a real inspiration.
Not another one like motorizing the revolving doors to get the customers in quicker.
Nothing like that.
Grabbed that one man and threw him clear into the hardware department. That was early days in Boston. Now the competition's tough. Could be curtains, Beans of Boston, if my store don't sell enough.
So, Steve, blimey crikey. As I mentioned before, this particular pilot episode is based on the German Week episode of Are You Being Served?
Yeah, I know.
Now, we'll have a clip of that in a moment. But first, just a mention of the time that the USA tried to do Dad's Army. Now, when you transplant a sitcom, you would be foolish not to use the best episode of...
Well, this is debatable.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about this more.
There's a lot to choose
later.
from. Yeah, so when they did Dad's Army over there, which the Americans called the Rear Guard, they did the very famous episode, The Deadly Attachment, where the U-boat crew are being held by the heroes of Warrington on Sea.
They didn't.
Yeah, with Philip Maddock in it, the Don't Tell Him Pike episode.
You know what I did?
What did you do?
I went looking at Beane, which is the US version, well, one of the US versions of Fawlty Towers, to see if they ever did a version of the Germans. But they didn't. But yes. Obviously, we were thinking along similar lines.
Anyway,
but the problem is then you're comparing, when we come back 30 years later, we are comparing the best episode of Are You Being Served against the pilot
of Beane's Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, it was their choice, dude. It's not our fault.
Yeah,
we're just, we're reporting on the facts as they are. In the mid to late 1970s, though, Steve-O, some Americanised versions of British series were doing incredibly well, with Three's Company, of course, being Man About the House, Sanford and Son being adapted from Steptoe and Son. The ratings were really good for those, so they just thought, why not give it a bash?
Yep.
Anyway, let's have a clip of the original German week from Are You Being Served, not the Beans of Boston version, which, as it turns out, had Joanna Lumley in it.
Yes, that's just one more reason to love it.
Housefart.
Beg your pardon?
Housefart. What's that mean then?
The way out, Mr. Bash. I suggest you take that one as we open in a few moments.
Say, look at this. Sex Underhosen. I wonder what's in here.
Well, don't get carried away, Mrs. Slocombe. Unterhosen, literally translated, means under trousers.
Under trousers? Do you mean knickers?
I'm not selling German sex knickers.
Sex, Mrs. Slocombe, is the word they use in Germany for six.
Oh, and what do they use for sex?
Same as they use everywhere else.
Coming back, though, to Beans of Boston, from the very first second, there's one element that takes things down a notch from the original, Steve, which you and I have already talked about off air, and that is the theme tune, which you were humming as you stepped into the podcast.
Well, it's catchy. It might be horrible, but it's catchy. So,
right,
it's it's doing something it's meant to, right?
So it sticks in your mind, but you just regret it.
Yeah, exactly. But I do like the visuals that go with this, because it shows the evolution of first the building as it stands in 1898. Is that when it's
something like that?
I was going to say it shows the building in its original context, but then over time you see slides of it being filled of more modern buildings coming in around it, and eventually it's surrounded by modern buildings that overlook it and that sort of stuff. And don't mind that, but also it provides context for this joke that we're going to get onto about Mrs. Slocombe's age a bit later on. So, yeah, I kind of like the visuals. They're not too bad, but the song, I don't know.
Well, especially again, and whether it's fair or not fair, when you compare it to the immortal Are You Being Served theme tune that's instantly recognisable, catchy, and a unique.
Well, it's much more jaunty, isn't it?
Oh, God, yeah.
This is
yeah. I think I put some time into phrasing how I'm going to trash talk this theme tune. Now, I understand, Steve-O, that there was probably some sort of union thing where you can't just use the theme tune from the other country, because the Musicians Union of America or whatever would probably need to re-record things. This is the reason people make these decisions. But this theme tune, Steve, I have described it as being dull, no energy, and it's a bit like a lullaby. Whereas, the original, it's got all the chiming tills and the registers.
Yeah, that's the thing I think about the original is the... It's like Aquarite's still going on.
Yeah, with fewer casualties.
Yeah.
But it does have this really odd ear-catching melody, and the chords are really odd and things. It's just a great classic theme tune, the Are You Being Served one, and this is a bit of a letdown after that. But this does, as you say, it tells you the story and it tells you the situation, which saves a bit of time, but it's not generating any excitement. But the remarkable thing is this theme tune was written by David Croft and Jeremy Lloyd.
Oh.
Oh, I thought, this will have been done by some American hack. But no, it's been done by Croft and Lloyd. I could not believe it. The opening scene, Steve, shows us old Mr. Fred Beane sat at his desk. Now, behind him, we see this beautiful view out the window. It's the Boston skyline, you know. So we know from that he's on a floor very high up. And as mentioned, old Mr. Beane is being played by the rather young 57-year-old Tom Poston.
Well, do you think 57's young?
Yeah, well, it is. It's increasingly so as I rocket towards that. Anyway, he's on the phone to a restaurant, yes, and he's booking a table for himself and, his presumably hot blonde young girlfriend, with the joke being, of course, that his hot young blonde girlfriend is a woman who is merely 60.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, because
He's chasing all these young women.
Yeah, he thinks she's a young woman because he's probably, 90, you see.
But the
So
women he's
going,
chasing in
"Cool,
the
I've got
shop are in their 20s.
way young, yeah, I know. He's a shocker.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, so par for the course then. Okay, jolly good. Young Franklin Beane, his nephew, he enters the room. I'll remind you, this young whippersnapper's been put in charge of the apparel department. Yes, so this kid is Mr. Peacock's boss. Anyway, young Franklin, since he's taken over the ladies and menswear, sales have gone down. Yes, it's not good.
Plummeted.
Yeah,
Would be another way
massively.
to describe it.
Yeah. Each month, Mr. Beane is getting stick from his board of directors to sort his nephew out and to fix the issue. And a bit of visual comedy, he unfurls that massive sales graph and it rolls down onto the floor to show how far down the sales are.
Well, you can't even see. You can't see how bad the figures are because the arrow's gone below or behind the desk.
Yeah. This is to show, it's a bit of prop comedy, but it does show sales went down in March, April, May, June, July, August, and I think old Mr. Beane mentions October. Yes, anyway, he says to remember the store motto, if at first you don't succeed, you'll be out on your butt. No, I'll have something to say about that later. Anyway, there's a decent gag here, though, Steve, about a customer that got his head trapped in a bucket and they had to cut eye holes into the bucket so the customer could leave.
I did like that one.
It was good.
Because he motorised the revolving doors.
Yeah, that was one of his bright ideas, young Franklin. Yeah, it creates a funny image in the viewer's mind. But anyway, show don't tell might have been better. But sometimes, as I've said before, talking about something hilarious, you don't have to spend any budget on it and it does the job almost as good.
Maybe they should have done more of that.
Yeah, well, talk about stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, just paint the picture instead of showing us.
There's a bit in here with Mr. Beane's new German secretary that you heard in the clip.
Ingrid.
Ingrid's been sandwiched in there for plot reasons, so this is good. All in all, though, this whole first scene lasts 3 minutes, and it does set up that young Franklin is hopeless. That old Fred gropes his secretaries, and the secretary is played by Dana House, who was Playboy Playmate around this time. So there you go. Yep. Ideally, young Franklin would be hopeless, but very likable, so that you're rooting for him and so that you'll want him to succeed and you'll invest in him. So that's the ideal angle. And we know he's hapless. Is he likable? This is going to be the question.
Right, okay.
Before we move on to scene 2, though, Steve, I've got 2 petty nitpicks. Now, the first one being the motto, if at first you don't succeed, you'll be out on your butt. Now, clearly, Franklin's been failing for 6 long months.
Yep.
Why is he still there? If at first you don't succeed, you'll be out on your butt.
And if the series had gotten picked up, presumably this should have been a through line that could have run for seasons and seasons. So
because otherwise there's nothing to fight,
That's exactly. That's the whole. This is the whole situation.
Totally.
That's the drama.
You're making a good point. But anyway, yeah, I know he's the heir to the throne, so we'll assume that his uncle's every month that goes by, he's saying, I'll just give him one more shot because he's my nephew.
He could have said, my sister will have my guts for garters if I fire this guy. I've got to...
Yeah.
I don't have a choice.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's in strict contravention of the store motto, though.
Yes, I know.
So that is a petty nitpick. But
What's your other thing?
Yeah, well, I'll get onto that. But that's the thing, is either there's a real threat of him getting fired and being out on his butt, in which case he already would be, or there's no threat at all because he's young Master Beane. They're playing fast and loose. You can't have it both ways. But the other thing, yes, Steve, this is ultra petty, this gripe. The Doll theme tune was all about times being tough and how these days it's competitive and Beans of Boston is struggling, and they make a big deal of it in the theme tune. And yet Mr. Beane is here in scene 1 saying furniture's up, hardware is up, everything is up except Franklin's floor. So they're coining it in, dude. None of this times are tough rubbish.
I just had a thought, and I think I can explain Franklin's survival.
Woohoo!
Every time his uncle's gone to fire him, some delectable young woman has walked into the room and distracted him from the job.
That fits in with everything we're seeing.
Well, it's the end of this episode as well, so...
Fair enough, I'll take it. Excellent. In scene 2, Steve, we've cut to the shop floor. We see the twin elevators opening. And a young blonde lady, she steps out of the left elevator, and a middle-aged, very tidy man steps out of the right elevator. Now, this set is very much like the original Are You Being Served set, so it is nice and familiar. The lifts are at the top of the stairs. The other thing that you get, in addition to the visual spaciousness and depth, is you get a lot of comedy mileage out of staircases. So remember last week when we were talking about Are You Being Served, and Mrs. Slocombe was sprinting after... No, it was Mrs. Peacock was sprinting after Mrs. Slocombe.
And they were going down in the high heels, and we were remarking on
it. Yeah. So staircases, like, I'm sure in every episode you can get a staircase gag, so, you know. And the good thing is, of course, it allows for grand entrances, right? Especially from Mr. Humphries. But I also like it because it's kind of, that acts as the transition from the real world outside for the staff. That when they come down those stairs, they now belong to the company. So it does all these things.
I can see that. Good point. Now, have you got the gag, which happens just after they've introduced themselves?
Which gag?
Well, Mr. Peacock says that he's in charge of the floor. And Miss Brahms says, "Oh, it looks lovely." I thought that was good.
Yeah, I do have that in my notes. Has it happened? Jolly good. Yeah, absolutely.
It's not all downside.
No, that's right. So yes, Shirley Brahms, the new girl, she meets Mr. Peacock, and let's have a clip of exactly what you described, Steve.
I'm sorry, madam. The store isn't open yet.
Oh, I'm not a customer. I'm the new sales girl, Shirley Brahms. Are you a salesman?
Not really. I'm in charge of the floor.
Oh, well, it looks lovely.
Not the actual floor, Miss Brahms. I run this entire department.
Oh, when Mr. Franklin Beane hired me, he told me he ran the department.
Well, in a way he does. He runs it into the ground. But the word from upstairs is that he won't be with us much longer.
Her voice, would you say it's noticeably put on?
Yes, I shouldn't nod. I should say yes. Yes.
Yes, and did you find it grating at all? Or
yes, I did.
Yes. It got me wondering whether UK Miss Brahms' voice is much put on, but I don't think so. I think it's just an accent. She's playing the accent quite thick, so...
Yeah.
But anyway.
I think the difference is Miss Brahms in this is very stagey. Like she's very loudly trying to reach the back row of the theatre as a live stage performer. She's not speaking at TV, natural television volumes.
Right.
So it's
she's projecting too much.
Yeah, she's projecting too much. This was a criticism of sort of Bonnie Langford in Doctor Who, in that because she'd come from the stage and doing panto and stuff, her facial expressions were over-exaggerated and she was very shouty because you have to project. But
is that why I hated her in Doctor Who?
Well, this is the theory, isn't it? Yes. Anyhow, in walks young Franklin Beane, and he says hi to Miss Brahms, while telling Mr. Peacock that, look, Mr. Peacock, you should have your coat off by now and straighten your tie. So it's pretty clear that these two don't get on.
Yeah, true.
Mr. Peacock introduces new Miss Brahms to her boss, Mrs. Slocombe, paying compliments to Mrs. Slocombe in unexpected ways. So he's praising her experience until, of course, he slips in an insult that you alluded to earlier, Steve, saying that she's been here so long she came with the building.
Yeah, well, he's firing all sorts of shots during this first little bit where they're in there together.
But on the surface, they sound complimentary.
Uh,
Until he gets to the line of,
Yeah.
so she came with the building.
I think you might have passed over this bit where Shirley is saying that she didn't really, I think she's saying it to Mr. Peacock, that she didn't really understand why she was recruited by Franklin. And as she's saying this, she's taking off her
coat,
to reveal some impressively stacked cleavage. The implication being that that's the reason that she was hired by Franklin.
Yeah.
And I think
the staff use the term stacked.
Oh, yes, they do later on. That's true.
Yeah.
So Mr. Peacock gives gives the viewers the impression that Franklin is a bit of a Lothario. But that doesn't really come across.
It doesn't come across,
all.
but maybe he's thinking he's in, it's a chip off the old block. Here we go. It's another one of the Beane boys
it's like that,
hiring these, totty, as they would have said in the day. So,
because I thought Franklin was right, like straight down the line, pretty much like Dave from News Radio kind of thing.
I think you're right. Yeah, he's got his mind on the job. He hasn't got his mind, he's not at all sleazy.
Yep.
Unlike his uncle, who's a total sleazebag.
Yeah. And just while we're on the subject,
I
think her top, it's not really that revealing.
No.
I mean, they make a big thing out of it, but it's not really that revealing. And I'm thinking if the UK version would have much more so.
Oh, yeah, the Americans are pretty crispy, especially in those days.
They wouldn't have pushed things that far.
No. Yep.
Right, sorry, now I've
Not
diverted
on
you with...
a major network, you couldn't have saucy goings-on, could you?
No, I guess not.
In sitcom land? But, yes, I agree with everything you're saying, Steve, yes. Where were we? Okay, so, yes, Mrs. Slocombe, who's just been introduced to young Miss Brahms, and as we know, Mr. Peacock said she's as old as the building, and then this is Mrs. Slocombe openly tells Mr. Peacock, her boss, to stuff it. Right in front of his boss, Mr. Franklin. Now that's,
you think this is implausible?
Possibly. She gets away with it. Now, I think in the British version, they do that, but they're less direct. They're more crafty. Whereas saying Mr. Peacock stuff it is not very crafty. It's very direct.
It would have been said under your breath or something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, sure, it happened occasionally in the British one, that people would be very direct and say, stick it up your jumper or whatever the case may be.
Well, she slaps him slaps him right in the chops.
But this may all sound like complaints, but there's some brilliant comedy coming up here, Steve. Handy gag about Mrs. Slocombe fanning her eyes with a hand fan because she just got new eyelashes installed, and I can barely read this out yet.
She's not allowed to blink until they've dried.
Yeah, I can't blink until the glue dries.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I thought that was fantastic. No pun intended. It was good. But yeah, my observation at this point, Steve-O, is that John Hillerman and Charlotte Rae are both very good already, even, in their first scenes. They're doing rather well. Mm-hmm. Anyway, plot-wise, Mr. Beane walks off. Miss Brahms goes off screen briefly to hang up her coat. So Mrs. Slocombe asks Mr. Peacock if he's free, because clearly she's going to give him feedback about this new employee. Anyway, we get this famous line for the first time, as in, Mr. Peacock, are you free? And he goes, yes, I think I'm free. And we all went, hey, and cheered. In my mind, we did.
The shop hasn't opened yet. Yeah, of course I'm free. Yeah. There isn't a customer in sight.
Yeah, but his response sort of implies that, it's good. Sorry, yes, Mrs. Slocombe, she's commenting that, look, I don't like that this new girl is better dressed than me. To which he flatteringly replies that, I don't think she is, it's just that she looks better.
This is what I mean. He's like having all these shots to do.
Yeah, I think it's classic, are you being served? I thought that was very good. Mm-hmm. Right, and then we get something that's standard for this series, or at least it should be. Mr. Lucas and Mr. Humphreys are late. They walk in together. The excuse is that Mr. Lucas had to pick up Mr. Humphreys, but it was the first time that Mr. Humphreys had ever been on a motorcycle before, which was their mode of transport. Mr. Humphreys is all flustered, and he said it was wild, and that he just screamed his head off the whole time. So I want to pause here, Steve-O, as I often do, to give my opinion on this, and I could well be wrong, but Here's the way I see it. The traditional Mr. Humphreys, even though he's a camp mother's boy, right? He's also this guy, he's tried everything. He's got an anecdote for everything. He always has a story about something amazing that's happened to him. He's a dude of experience, right? But he finds new things to do. Whereas this USA Mr. Humphreys, yes, he's camp and all that. But this whole thing of not having tried something that's fairly common, like being on a motorcycle, just so we can play up how unmacho he is. It's not really getting a laugh, I don't think, and it's not really the same character. That's where I stand at this early stage.
Yep, I've got no qualms with that.
Oh, good. Anyhow, this all leads to a meeting held by young Franklin Beane with the staff. So he's going to give them a bit of a pep talk before they open. Now, he's very forceful about saying sales are down and they have to fix it. And then we get all the range of gags where Mr. Humphrey's socks have been down. Very little has been happening in Mr. Granger's trousers. And Mrs. Slocombe's underwear has been down for weeks.
Bomb.
So as expected, Mr. Beane's idea is to rip off other department stores' trend of having, French week. There's been an Italian week. There's been Oriental week and others. But Mr. Beane has thought of German week, which is one of the options left on the table. And now we have a clip.
I have thought of a week that they have all missed.
Irish week?
No, Goldberg's is doing that. But none of them have thought of a German week. Huh?
Maybe because it's such a lousy idea.
Well, it's either that or an Eskimo week, and statistics show that in Boston, Volkswagen outsells dog sleds 6,973 to 1. Now, there's the bell. The store's opening. Everybody get to work, and I'll let you know when the stuff arrives.
That motorcycle has ruined my hair. Menswear.
So the phone rings after this meeting, and as I was researching this and reading various blogs and all this sort of stuff, someone pointed out that when Mr. Humphreys, who answers the phone, he goes, menswear.
Yep.
It's much funnier when British Mr. Humphreys does it, because of course he's got this light musical voice, whereas this dude's, taller and got a deeper voice, and it doesn't work quite as well. And I thought that blog writer was on the money.
Yep, I agree. I wonder whether you read the same blog as me.
Oh, could be. That would mean I would have made references, whereas I just, pinch stuff from places and throw in
you
my
did
own
mention
rambling.
it. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I know which blog it is. I don't remember. I don't write notes about which blog it is. Yes, anyway, this is where we get back to stackedness, Steve. So Mr. Lucas, he's admiring the hiring that's been done by young Mr. Beane, and he congratulates young Franklin on hiring Miss Brahms, who he does describe as stacked, unquote. And then he starts giving him advice on how to woo her.
Yeah, I like this bit.
Yeah. Did you have a specific line out of that exchange?
Well, Mr. Lucas is saying, this is what you've got to do, right? You've got to look her straight in the eyes and, have a kind of a stare at her. So then he's showing Franklin what he must do. Yeah. Franklin's he's practicing, right? He's returning the stare. And Mr. Humphreys happens to walk past and he goes, well, there goes my ride home.
Yeah.
As if Franklin's going to be jumping on the back of Mr. Lucas's motorcycle.
Bike. Yeah, because they're obviously there's some chemistry going on there. Yeah. That brings us on to a conversation between Mr. Peacock and the caretaker, Mr. Johnson. Now, by the way, Mr. Johnson had to struggle down the steps, Steve, with this trolley full of boxes, which looked very awkward. Now, there's a reason for this, though. So we find out that he's taken the customer elevator
instead of the service one, which would be
at floor level.
At floor level, yeah.
Perfectly put. That would have solved the whole issue, but of course, the service elevators are obviously out. We needed this so Mr. Peacock could tell him off for using the customer elevators, right? This is all standard are you being served stuff. But also, making good use of the staircase. It's pretty good. Anyway, Mr. Johnson, he is the only black member of staff that we see, right? And Mr. Peacock had simply called him Johnson instead of Mr. Johnson.
Yep.
To which Mr. Johnson gives him a mouthful, right? And he goes, listen here, buddy. It's Mr. Johnson. Thank you very much. In typical way that Mr. Mash or whoever else would do. Yes, anyway. And so Mr. Peacock, he apologizes and he says, oh, I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Johnson. And Mr. Johnson, who's just been rolling him up, he goes, no sweat. As if it was no big deal. But so he got him a beauty there. He was just winding him up. Anyway, so they successfully nailed the class-based arguments that we used to see between Mr. Mash and Captain Peacock, but they've also managed to add that little race element as well. And it all works just as well as it does in Britain. Mr. Beane, he strolls up to inspect the boxes that have just been delivered. Yeah, Mr. Beane. I'll call him Young Franklin. Young Franklin, he strolls up to inspect these boxes that Mr. Johnson's just brought in. And it's full of the German gear, Steve.
Ah, the Lederhosen.
Yes. And he says, "Thank you, Mr. Johnson." Now, this hammers the point home about how even the posh boy calls him Mr. Johnson and treats him with due respect, whereas Mr. Peacock's just an asshole. So it illustrates how progressive and lovely the young new boss is, while Mr. Peacock is a snob. Anyway, the boxes of German gear need unpacking, so this they do. And we start getting into the real comedy because, Mr. Peacock, he whips out this pair of leather shorts and he's cracking gags. And Mr. Granger has an old World War I German helmet with, the big spike on top.
Oh, this is a Pickelhaube.
It is, Steve.
Pickelhauben.
Oh, you've done your research.
Yeah. A spiked leather or metal helmet that was worn in the 19th and 20th centuries by Prussian and German military officers, firefighters and police.
Oh.
They say it's still worn today as part of ceremonial wear in the militaries of certain countries such as Sweden, Chile and Colombia.
Far out. You want to be careful around one of these units. There's a big spike on top.
But the joke is they say it's a German football helmet, and wouldn't you hate to be tackled from behind? Yeah. I thought that was a perfect kind of an adaptation of this German stuff to the US.
The US at football, yeah. Yep, it's a beautiful illustration of the thing actually working, which is good. Then we get an exact copy, Steve, of the Mrs. Slocombe and Miss Brahms sex Unterhosen exchange that I played earlier in the original version, so that's what the clip said.
Right.
We get the visual gag of Miss Brahms pulling out the massively giant bra out of the box, and everyone's talking about a Buston halters. So,
even Miss Brahms couldn't feel I couldn't feel that one.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was a small, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Something like that. I think in the original British version, Miss Brahms says, you could fit a fair bit of coal in those or something like that. Yes, anyway, Mr. Peacock says that this won't improve sales, right? He's saying this whole idea and all this tat we're selling is garbage. And young Franklin B says, "Well, I've made the decision. I'm captain of the ship and we're either going to sink or swim." And then Mr. Lucas and Mr. Humphreys salute him. And then when his back's turned, they pretend to go down with the ship by sinking slowly behind the counter. A nice bit of visual comedy, I thought.
They've got a strong disappearing behind counters and desks game.
Yeah, which is hell on the knees, isn't it? So,
yes.
Well done, everybody. Now, my question here, Steve, is there's an ad break on the YouTube, the terrible, terrible quality YouTube version of this on... Yeah, did you watch the ads? You did, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Ooh. It was like an artifact of history or something.
Yeah, it's great. Oh, I noticed, Steve, that they were advertising a Mazda GLC.
Oh, it was an RX-7, wasn't it?
No, it was a 323.
A 323?
It was the same model. I had a green one of those. A Mazda 323, same model. That didn't last long, let me tell you. Yeah.
I wonder how many inroads Mazda made into the US market.
Probably loads, I reckon.
Good cars.
Yeah.
Reliable.
Well, that's right. Yeah, because over there, let's not get into Mazdas and Fords and stuff, but I do remember that in Australia, the Mazda 323 and the Ford Laser were exactly the same car that had been retooled in a cooperation thing. And yes, so there we go.
Don't get me started on Toyotas.
Oh,
we could be here all night.
Yeah, a brilliant little Corolla. Yes, we will be here all night. I too had a Corolla. There you go, everybody. Well done. Returning to the show, Steve, it's either the same day or it's a day later or something, who knows. But Frankie B goes into his own office, which is lower down. And we know this because the view out the window is of a nearby brick wall. Yeah. Anyway, he sees old Mr. Beane asleep in his chair. Yes, anyway, Mr. Beane the elder accidentally thought it was his office. So he's, a bit ditzy, the old boy. Anyway, Miss Brahms pops in. She's going to give him some sales figures. But, of course, they're clearly not very good. And so when the lecherous old Mr. Beane wakes up, she tries to sort of hide these sales figures,
Yep.
Yes, anyway.
And she does succeed in doing that.
Well, that's true. That's true. I think he's also distracted because he's admiring this young hot blonde lady. So yeah, she's got this sheet of sales figures behind her back, blowing the gag. Or he doesn't know they're bad yet, you know. So young Franklin asks if she has the sales figures, and she says they're not ready yet.
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. Beane says, look, I can't hang around here all day waiting for the sales figures, so I've got to get off to the club. And they said, oh, yes, is it the bridge club? And he goes, no, the strip club. So, Mr. Beane, again, going after young ladies, dear oh dear. Anyway, with the old man out of the room, importantly, Miss Brahms gives him the sales figures
Yeah.
and explains that she hid them because they're absolutely terrible and the whole day's takings were about $12.
Yes, well, he sees $12.95. Goes, that's not too bad. $1,295. No,
Yeah.
$12.95.
Yes, it's pretty bad. But as you referred to earlier, Stephen, I can't remember if it was on air or off air, so apologies to the listener. But this whole scene is a bunch of dialogue between the two young members of the cast, neither with much experience. Sadly, it's a bit wooden from both of them. Now, as I've said, with Miss Brahms, played by Lorna Patterson, you don't quite know if it was inexperience and she's acting badly, or if she's a brilliant actor playing a stilted, ditzy, but sincere Miss Brahms.
Mm-hmm.
So is she playing a character who's just that way, or is she badly playing the character? I don't know. But it is stagey and loud. It's loud.
Yeah. And this is one of those scenes I was talking about earlier where her role's really elevated in this show, and it seems a bit weird, really, that she's delivering the sales figures to the boss. You think Captain Peacock, Mr. Peacock, of all people, would be the one doing this.
That's true.
But then she goes on to give him a bit of a pep talk, doesn't she?
Yes, and we need Mr. Peacock out of the room so that he can come in a minute and discover something a little bit untoward, which we'll soon find out about. Oh, no, or is that later on? I don't know.
I think that's a bit later on, because she goes on to say here, because he's down, you know, she's giving him the bad news.
Yes.
And then Franklin's down in the dumps, but she says, you know, think about these inventors and where we would be if they hadn't kept pushing on with it, you know, despite failing. And then she says, oh, you know, there was Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison and Harry Needleman. And he goes, well, Harry Needleman, who's that? And she said, exactly, he gave up.
Yeah. I thought that was a terrible gag. Did you like that one? Did you think it was
no, it was pretty bad. But it was just another example of how they've adapted it for the US, I think.
All right, so I'd accidentally gone ahead in the plot, but to make up for it, here's a clip.
Oh, no. I don't get it. You would at least think some Germans would have come in.
But Mr. Beane, you haven't given it a chance. What can you tell from one day?
No, it's no use. Everything I do is a disaster. I might as well give up.
Oh, that's no way to think. What about Thomas Edison? Did he give up?
No.
And Alexander Graham Bell, did he give up?
No.
And look at Harry Needleman.
I never heard of Harry Needleman.
Sure, he gave up.
Oh.
Now listen, everybody's out here waiting for you. You gotta get out there and inspire them.
You're right, Miss Brahms. And thanks. What am I gonna say?
I don't know.
So we move ahead to this staff meeting for which they've all had to stay back in their own time to discuss the figures and how it went. So the idea becomes that they should double down because they haven't been going German enough, and they've got to really increase the German atmos. They've all got to dress up in German outfits and have a German band and, you know, give it everything rather than just stocking stuff. Mr. Peacock objects to dressing up. Of course he does. This is on the basis that, look, someone needs to maintain authority over the floor, and his clothes, they symbolise his authority, to which Mr. Lucas wisecracks that he should dress up as Hitler.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah. Now, young Franklin B., he mentions that he hopes there's no anti-German feeling in the department. I hope there's not. Better not be any anti-German feeling.
No, I mean, they're running around calling Germans krauts and all this sort of stuff.
Yep.
But apart from that...
Yeah, they go in hard compared to the British version because, they say, what are all these... Oh, no, we don't want to ruin the big climactic gag.
I'll have more to say about that later.
Yeah, good. Mrs. Slocombe, right? So she relates this tale that she was in Europe for the war effort and that she got blown out of her Jeep and she landed flat on her back in a French farmyard. And it was the German army that was responsible. Mr. Humphreys says that all the other times she was on her back in a French field, it was the French army that was responsible. Now, all of these come straight from the original.
Yep. But there is a point of difference, which I'll talk about later.
Yes? Oh, good. Well, because I've got the point of difference now. But it depends which point of difference we're talking about. Well, I'm just going to press ahead because the thing I know, obviously, what's happening here is the American Mr. Humphreys is getting all the lines that should have gone to Mr. Lucas.
Yes, this is what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yes. So that... And then when Mr. Humphreys gets reprimanded for being nasty, he gets spoken to quite harshly for being nasty to Mrs. Slocombe. And he goes, "Ooh, I enjoyed being punished," or whatever it is. And yes.
I've never been spoken to like that before. I kind of liked it.
Yeah. But in the end, it's decided that they'll go overboard on the German stuff, yes. And we skip ahead in time, and we skip over to young Frankie B's office. So Miss Brahms walks in, and she's wearing her German shorts and her high socks and a lace-up tight top in the style of a German beer serving maid.
Yep.
All that sort of stuff. Now, I have skipped ahead, Steve. Did you have anything else to add about Mr. Lucas and Mr. Humphreys' lines swapping there? Did you have in-depth brilliant insights?
There was just one gag that we missed where Mr. Granger is lamenting the lack of sales, and he said that he did have someone who came in looking for something with broad shoulders in Harris tweed. And
predictably
Mr. Humphrey says, "Well, aren't we all?"
Typical Mr. Humphrey stuff.
Pretty much.
So he's getting Mr. Lucas's lines and Mr. Humphrey's lines.
Yeah, that's right.
As you say, we'll talk about this later on. So where we are at the moment is, obviously, Miss Brahms is wearing the saucy German gear in the office of young Frankie B. And, there's been a bit of a problem with her lace at the top has come undone, so she needs to retie the knot, which is right where her boobs are. And can Mr. Beane please put his finger on the laces to hold them in place while she ties the knot, or it's all going to come loose. And, of course, what happens? Mr. Peacock comes walking in without knocking, catching them in what looks like a compromising situation.
Yes, his fingers caught.
Yes. It looks very saucy, but...
How does she get her shoes on in the morning?
Yeah, I don't know.
She has to get someone else to put their finger on.
Yeah, well, she'll be living at home with Mum, so she'll go, "Mum, hey, Mum," at top volume, so she could hear from 3 flights up. Yes, it was all completely innocent, Steve, I'll have you know.
Yeah, well, we've already established that
yes,
Franklin's a stand-up
chappy
man.
Yes, he's a little bit embarrassed,
despite his reputation.
No, that's right, the family reputation. He, yes, he's sort of averting his eyes a bit, and he was a bit reluctant to do that, but we got there in the end.
Yep.
Miss Brahms exits. Mr. Peacock is there in full German mode with his
German mode
shorts and, all the gear. And that is so like, we can witness his pomposity being slowly deflated. He's not very happy. Anyway, after a quick chat about not very much at all, because the only reason he's there is because he had to spring them doing that thing.
Well, he's there to complain that he was promised his clothes would give him
authority,
the usual air of authority.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'm getting a lot of air and not much authority."
That's actually not a bad line. I must have missed that.
It's another one they took directly from the UK.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, anyway, we cut back to the main floor. Now, they've got this spiffing display that they've put on. Mr. Lucas and Mr. Humphreys enter. Now, they're at the top of the stairs where all good entrances are made. And they're doing the classic bit where one guy has the long shorts and someone has the super short shorts.
Yep.
Oh, it's a staple of British comedy. So Mr. Humphreys is the one wearing the super tight short shorts.
Eye-wateringly tight.
Yeah, I think it would be too. This never fails, Steve. Now, you may recall that in another Sitcom Showdown where we covered the goodies episode, Scoutrageous,
yes,
Bill, who's very short, got the enormous shorts, and Graham, who's very tall compared to Bill, got the short shorts. So, yes, they nicked the same gag. And did I write down the years? Maybe I did. Oh, anyway, yes, it was after... the original Are You Being Served did this. So I think the goodies went, that's a brilliant shorts gag. We're going to steal that.
I love that.
Yeah, it's being used again here. Oh, that was episode 22, everybody, of Sitcom Showdown. So if you haven't heard that in a while.
If you want to hear more about short shorts?
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
Eye-wateringly tight shorts.
With a hint of Scout thrown in, then track that one.
Dum-dum.
Dibby-dibby-dum-dum-dum. Back at Beane's, it turns out that Mrs. Slocombe has been getting right into the German wine. She's now quite tiddly. The USA version puts a handy new line in here, though, which is pretty good. So when young Franklin says, look, you should slow down on that wine, Mrs. Slocombe, it can sneak up on you. Mr. Humphrey says, I think it's mugged her.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's certainly not bad. Mr. Peacock announces that old Mr. Beane is on his way down in the elevator, so the crew all have to take their places. We don't quite know what for yet, but the tension is building, Steve. The tension is building.
Oh, yeah.
Now, when the big man arrives, they sing a welcome to him, which is very nice. And old Mr. Beane says, who are all the damn Huns on the elevator?
Did you notice that he's got Ingrid on his arm as he says this?
No, oh, right. Yeah, she might take
She's
offence
German.
at that. Yeah. No consideration at all, this old dude.
No.
Far out.
She even, at the end of the episode, says how great the whole thing's been, and it's reminded her of home and made her feel less homesick.
Oh.
Who are all these damn Huns?
On the elevator. Yes. The American, the British version just said Germans. They did not say Huns, so they were a bit more reserved.
This German band reminds me of the Charlie's Angels movie.
Mm-hmm.
You probably don't know what I'm talking
Depends
about.
which Charlie's Angels movie you're talking about. No, I don't know what you're talking
Or
about.
the Drew Barrymore
And Lucy Liu.
version. Yeah, that one. There's a scene where they dress up as a German band in order to get some information from someone. It's pretty cool.
And did they have pigtails?
It's quite jaunty and fun. Yes, they had of course they had the pigtails.
Oh, brilliant.
And the short. Yes, of course it was short shorts, yes.
And the Strumpfs.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll talk about Strumpfs later on. We're always promising to talk about stuff later on. Right, so, yes, Fran, or Frank, as my notes should say, makes a comment there. Just to rewind a little bit. His uncle...
He's Frank.
Frank, I think you'll find. And he says, look at this fantastic, authentic German band I've hired. And he asks them if they're ready. And to which the trumpet player says, Si, senor. Which I rewound about 8 times because it was so well delivered. Oh, man. Yeah, they did the same thing in the British one, except they've got their authentic German band, and he goes, okay, you may start. And he goes, all right, mate, because they're clearly Cockneys or whatever. So this version is much better, I feel. Anyway, they start the German dance, and there's all this thigh slapping and all the rest. Now, after a minute of this, and everybody should remember that Mrs. Slocombe's off her face, this argument erupts between Mr. Peacock and Mrs. Slocombe about how hard they should slap. And so they take these shots at each other. They're slapping away until young Frank B intervenes and he gets walloped accidentally by a very drunk Mrs. Slocombe. And he falls backwards into the display.
I think the writers of Blackadder 3 swiped this gag for the, that's not a real hit. This would be a real hit.
Why, I hardly touched the man.
I think you hit him very hard.
Nonsense! That would have been a hard hit. I just hit him like that.
No, sir. A soft hit would be like this. Whereas you hit him like this.
Good times.
They do it very well. Right, so young Franklin's, on his bot in the display, and Mrs. Slocombe's drunk, and the old Mr. Beane's been witnessing all of this, and Franklin thinks, right, they said it's game over, the sales aren't good, and he wasn't impressed by all the German stuff, and he's for the high jump, and it's all been a disaster. So he hands in his resignation, but his old uncle says, no, don't be too hasty. Turns out all this has made my lovely German secretary very happy. She was thinking of going home until she saw all this great German stuff, and you pointed this out, Steve. And because it's been nice German stuff all week, his secretary has felt very, very welcomed and comfortable, so she'll stay. And that, of course, makes old Uncle Fred Beane very happy. So he keeps Franklin on for another month. And the music strikes up again, and everyone starts dancing again, and that's the end.
Good times.
And now I should hand over to you, Steve.
Oh, what would you want to do?
I don't know. Just to
throw some...
Yes. Have you got some good points or bad points?
Well, I've just got general thoughts about how this worked, really. And I have got the thoughts from that blog, and I've highlighted some because I think they're worth discussing as well. So that's pretty much what I've got.
Cool. Did you take note of which blog it is? Are we going to credit
yeah, I do.
this
It was
person?
Cinema Crazed.
Brilliant.
2018 blog. The Bootleg Files, Beans of Boston. What do you want to do?
Yeah, let's
Talk
do
about-
that. Mm-hmm.
Go through my stuff and then go on to those, or yeah, all right. So first thing here is that scene 1, which is Franklin and his uncle Mr Beane, I didn't think was a particularly good start to the episode. I think maybe they should have had it start with, in the main set, perhaps with Miss Brahms arriving for her first day, and then throwing back to the scenario after that, or something like that, because it's just 2 or 3 minutes. That's just a bit too dull, I think, to really get you going.
I think so.
German week, I wasn't sure if that worked or translated as well in the US. In the UK, there was obviously the World War II was still fresh in everyone's minds, and
it was direct.
You also see in the UK version, there's a lot of talk about being in the common market now, and that was obviously topical as well. So we had this trade going on between the two countries. So it was a real cultural thing, whereas the US and Germany, I'm not sure whether it's got the same gravitas, but
yeah, not to the same extent.
What alternative could you use instead of Germany? I'm not sure.
Because as they pointed out, all the other ones have been done.
Well, they could have rearranged
changed
it, right?
Yeah,
so that no one else had thought of whatever it was that they wanted to use.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if that really was working in their favour. I'm asking here, where are the catchphrases?
Yeah.
I'm free and Mrs. Slocombe's pussycat.
Yep.
There's none of that.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't that run? Anyway, who knows? Yeah, but that just seemed like a major omission. And yeah, now I've got this note here about the lines being given to the wrong characters. So it just seems so wrong that Mr. Humphreys, rather than Mr. Lucas, is the one who's winding up Mrs. Slocombe. And then, like you were saying, he's like getting the best of Mr. Lucas's lines, and he's getting his own lines on top of it. So
yeah,
what's the deal with that? Mr. Lucas has got practically nothing left to do.
Absolutely right, yeah. I've got the same here, is that, you've got your young, virile dude, and that's now here done by Franklin Beane, who's the young, hunky dude. And so you don't need Mr. Lucas for that. And for some inexplicable reason, Mr. Lucas's lines have gone to Mr. Humphreys. So he's not needed in this show. The character of Mr. Lucas. So especially with Miss Brahms being the new bod. So that's 3 strikes against him, actually. You don't need him for anything at all.
Yeah. I did notice we've got a large difference in runtime.
Oh, like 5 minutes less, roughly, or something?
Well, I would think so, yeah. Something around there. So you miss out on the whole conversation where they're sitting around a table and they're grumbling and they're saying, no, I'm not going to dance, and da-da-da-da-da. So you miss out on all that kind of build-up to the actual final scene where they're dancing.
Ah, so that's what they've cut out, yeah.
Well, it's a large chunk of what they've cut out. Yeah. No, I did also, it's a pilot episode, so I guess we should bear that in mind, but I did think there was a bit of a difference in the budget when you said you liked the visuals, but I thought, say, the bar thing, for example, in the final scene, it's a much more lavish German bar thing set up right in the middle of the set in the final scene.
In the original?
In the original.
Yeah.
Whereas here it's kind of just a table off to the side or something like that.
Yeah, that young Franklin falls into.
Yep.
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
I wouldn't, because I think you got to bear in mind it's a pilot, so they're not going to go to maybe the full expense that you would expect in a show that's been commissioned and running for a few seasons or something
so
like that.
they would have given it a bigger set.
Maybe. Spruced it up a bit. I don't know. Anyway, they're my thoughts. And then I've got these other notes. But do you want to go first, or do you want to go to these?
Oh, yes, I'll enjoy a good rant.
Yep.
I want to go on about Mr. Humphreys. Now, this is a tough task, if not an impossible task, because...
You mean to follow up John Inman's?
Yeah, because he's so unique. So Alan Sues did it differently. It's not as good, in my opinion. It's not as good a portrayal, but he's in a no-win situation, because if he'd attempted to do an exact copy of what John Inman was doing, it wouldn't have lived up to what John Inman was doing, because John Inman is John Inman, and he's irreplaceable. That's not the word I'm looking for, but he's inimitable. So you can't copy what he did, but at the same time, if you don't do what he did, then people are going to go, well, it's not the same thing, is it? So the poor dude, he is in a no-win situation. There are characters, I believe there's a few characters played by actors and you can't replicate them. So I've got some nominations here, Steve.
Oh, go.
Let me
Sounds
run these by
interesting.
you.
Go ahead.
So I think other actors can't play the following roles. Like, obviously, I've got Moss from the IT crowd.
Oh, he just came to mind, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You can't have someone else playing Moss. It's just not done. It's impossible. You don't even try. I think Miranda Richardson as Queenie, that would be tough to have someone else playing. You know, would Queenie be the same character if it wasn't Miranda Richardson? I'll leave that up to other people to decide. Rick Mail as Rick from The Young Ones. I don't think you could have. That's a slightly different situation because that was his stand-up character that then got put into a sitcom. But, you know, it's a... Yes. And, of course, Mr. Humphries is played by John Inman. So it doesn't help that Alan, as Mr. Humphries, is being giving a lot of lines, as we pointed out, that were Mr. Lucas's, and they're sort of smart-arsey, and they're not Mr. Humphries' character. But in some ways, as I outlined before, he's quite different. I think he's less of a believable character. I think he's more of a caricature.
The thing that comes to mind when you say, apart from Miranda Richardson, is that all those actors you've mentioned are essentially playing them. They're playing themselves, and they're like larger than life
human beings.
Yeah. So you can't replace them, really.
No. So that's I think that bears out my point, which is you can't replace Mr. Humphries, and you can't replace Moss, and you can't replace...
Well, I guess what I'm saying is you can't replace John Inman.
No.
And you can't replace Richard Ayoade. And...
Yeah. No disrespect to Alan Sues, but he was in a no-win situation, as I say. Anyway, to move on and get back to the point that some characters are irreplaceable and unreplicatable, it is ironic, though, that we have a Mr. Peacock and a Mrs. Slocombe that really do justice to the originals, and I would happily keep watching them. And I think if you're going to have people to replace those two, this is as good as it gets. I mean, what's your call on that?
Oh, yeah, I think they're really good. I just had a thought, which is that the Australian remake of A Being Served, they said to this John Inman problem, let's just get John Inman.
Yeah, they did.
Problem solved, boys.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's where 90% of the budget's going to go.
Sure.
We'll fly him over here. And, you know, like the cliched thing to do here would be to bring up having Crichton in Red Dwarf being flown over to America for theirs, and Neil for The Young Ones being flown over to America for theirs, and Moss being flown over to America for theirs.
Oh, man.
So there we go. Have you ever seen the pilot for IT Crowd in the USA? No. It is awful, Steve.
Oh, no, I have, because it's the guy from Community.
Yeah.
Is in that. Yeah.
I've got a few words to say about young Frankie B.
Right, go ahead.
Played by the actor who I thought, I referred to him earlier as a bit wooden, George O'Hanlon Jr. But
Pinocchio-esque?
No. What I like, though, is that, because I think they're very similar in character, because Mr. Rumbold, right, he was detached, but he was fair. You know what I mean? I think young Mr. Beane is also fair. I think, actually, that character does quite a good job of replacing Mr. Rumbold. You get more comedy mileage out of Mr. Rumbold, but, I think as far as how the characters are written, I thought that wasn't too bad. It's a pity he's such a bland character. And also, because you've made him young and he's the heir apparent, it does change the show. So the show now centres around Franklin Beane and Miss Brahms, whereas the original doesn't centre around those characters at all.
Yeah.
I'll hold off on a few notes, or if you've got some there, Steve. Have you got anything?
Well, I've just highlighted a few things from the blog.
Cool. They
said that the British-style socio-economic divisions, or the class issues, for want of a better word, those divisions were never part of the American experience, which made replication of that tricky. I think we touched on that a bit, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
They talk about the elimination of the character of Mr. Rumbold, replaced by Frank Beane. They didn't think that particularly worked, which we've also talked about. They talk about George O'Hanlon Jr. being pretty bad. They said his robotic line readings flattened every punchline. Harsh.
Well, I find that fairly, harsh but accurate.
Yes, and then they say that the episode went out of kilter because there was too much attention given to Franklin, which left the surplus number of ensemble cast members with little or nothing to do.
Mm.
And they give Mr. Granger as an example of that.
Yep.
They said that
these highly experienced actors who could have really made hay with the lines, not getting an opportunity to do so.
Exactly.
Yes.
Then they talked about Alan Sues and said that he was a bit too over-caffeinated and bedraggled rather than light camp, which steamrolled the character's double entendres.
Mm.
And that was it.
Right. Ah,
And
I
now
dare
back to
say
you.
that blogger's better at their job than I am at this one.
No.
Yes, surely. Now, yeah, all I've got left to say really is a couple of things. For the Mr. Grace character of old Mr. Beane. So Mr. Grace, he is a frail, tiny dude.
Yep.
He does have a penchant for nice secretaries and stuff, but he had a good heart, and he was very matter of fact, and ultimately he was a harmless dude.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't describe him even as lecherous, really. And the whole joke with him is the very idea that he could actually be capable of getting saucy is funny in itself, because he's so unbelievably old. And if he did, right, any secretary could easily slap him down or just walk a little bit more briskly and outpace him by several hundred meters. But this old Mr. Beane, he's taller, he's stronger, he's very lecherous. And I don't think he does have a good heart. I think he's just a mean old SOB. And he is a bit creepy because he could actually follow through with some of his stuff, you know. Now, I don't normally go on about such things, but I think I just wanted to highlight the difference between the two characters. Yeah, so I think, they overall with this show, they've added some nifty new gags. No doubt, I reckon there are 3 or 4 good gags they've added, and some nice little tweaks to make them American. They have made some of the other gags worse, or not work as well as they did in the original one, and that's due to the circumstances changing, or, as we keep pointing out, a different character delivering them. But I thought it was very interesting to compare Are You Being Served and Beans of Boston, and I enjoyed it. So, partly I enjoy it because I do like picking on things and pointing out stuff that I can then rant about, but also I enjoyed watching the show overall. I wouldn't want to watch a whole series of it or anything, but it's a nice curio.
A strange thing happened when I was watching it.
Oh.
The first time I watched this episode, I thought, why didn't this actually get picked up? Because I didn't think it was too bad. But then
Right, yeah.
I've watched it 2 or 3 times more since then, and every time it just gets worse and worse.
Oh.
And I made the mistake of actually watching the UK version
Yeah.
of German Week, and that was the final nail in the coffin, really.
Oh, okay.
But, there's been a lot of sitcoms that have had fairly mediocre pilots, certainly worse than this one.
Yes.
Been picked up and gone on to knock it out of the park, so who knows?
Well, that's right, and you don't know what competition there was. So it might have been up against 5 other really good pilots. And if it had been piloted in a different year when the competition wasn't as strong, it might have got a run.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, but overall, I love doing these episodes where we look at comedy transplants.
Yeah.
It's very good.
It's a lot of fun.
I don't think I'm going to do the Australian one. In fact, Steve, if you had a sneaky peek at that, I'd almost rather watch the American one.
How can you?
Of Are You Being
Where
Served?
is your loyalty
Yeah.
to the mother country?
Yes,
Diff'rent?
I don't know. Wow.
You haven't even seen it and you're already...
No, I have. I
you have
watched,
seen it?
Yeah. I watched a couple of episodes of the Australian version.
So you're ranking it number 3 in the...
Yes, I am. I'm
the
ranking
versions.
it number 3, even though it does have John Inman in it. Yeah.
Wow.
And he's good. He's doing his absolute best. He's very watchable.
Do they do a version of German Week?
Oh, I don't know. But
Like-
yeah, you could certainly...
Are they trying to sell kimonos or something like that?
Could be. I dread to think what the Australians would have done with that one. Oh, my God. Because we're not known for our subtlety. I'm probably selling us short. But yes, in terms, it would be an interesting experiment for anyone to do, I think, is to watch. What order would you watch them in? The worst to first? Watch the Australian one first.
I think you have to
Then
start
the American.
Start with the worst and work your way up.
Okay. And then watch the British one.
Yep.
Yeah, so you can start with some John Inman and finish
Go to
with
Alan
some John
Sues and
Inman.
then
Yeah.
back to John Inman. Yes. Oh, that was fun.
Yes.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Join us next time on Sitcom Showdown when we'll be putting another 5-star episode under the microscope. And in the meantime, you can contact us with feedback on Facebook, Twitter @Sitcom Showdown, or by email sitcomshowdown@gmail.com.